I was first introduced to the concept of the community action researcher at the Horniman Museum. And we were encouraged to search the collection. And then I realized that they had objects from Haiti, which is where my father's from. And of those objects, a few of them were musical instruments. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. I have a history of being a musician, so why not connect with the culture in that way? And also, for me, so yeah, there was this element of them being given this opportunity to tell and rewrite this story from someone from that diaspora's perspective. For me, it was also a way to connect and with the community, the Haitian community. He died rather young, and we were back in the States, and so I wasn't able to connect with the culture in the same way. So it was a point of connection, but also understanding of this instrument and how it is integrated into the culture, and learn about, the instrument's characteristics, its intended purpose, how it links between the past and the present, migration, its origins. So essentially, the instrument story. And so in a way, it was what motivated the research, was that we were both on our own journey of discovery. So the instrument had its journey, and I was on my journey of uncovering our history. When you select this object of the collection, and it's this fully formed object, and part of your role is to unpack its story. And so there's so many, cultural elements, just so many elements to unpack, whether it's a musical element, there was an agricultural element, the cha-cha maracas is made from a gourd, which means it's of the earth. That links it back to the agricultural. So made me then think about what are the conditions of the soil that it grows in, what impact has soil degradation had to it, and what impact is climate change having to it. Then there's the transatlantic journey, from Africa to Haiti in relation to this instrument. In many ways, the instrument migrated, perhaps also forcefully, like those that were enslaved, from Africa to Haiti, and even when you think about the full story of it, you have to go to these different parts of the world to begin to reconstruct its history. So that was definitely a barrier. There's also like the language. Most of the language in those countries, which are all francophone, due to colonial and imperialistic reasons, written language and oral language was, challenged or eradicated in many ways. So there isn't a lot that's written about the instrument. And if it is, it's perhaps in a language that I don't know, whether that's, I'm not fluent in Creole. I don't know Wolof or any of the languages in Congo. Oh, by the way, I've kind of started focusing the research on Haiti, and then the African countries at the moment is Senegal and Congo. But then also I equally don't know French. So language, whether it was written or orally, was a challenge or for me. If it didn't have a picture in a book that was in a foreign language to suggest that there's some content on here about that, or, not having the word of the instrument in that particular language was equally a barrier. So knowing the word of how that country refers to that object was beyond important. Oral histories required translation or interpretation. Everything required, if it wasn't in English, that was part of one of my barriers. Also time and funding. I work full time, and so this is, a research of passion, and finding time and also funding. I've continued on with this, and how do I, source funding, and then when you do, it's limited, pools of funding that is available, or it's one off. They've only done it at one time, and you find out like a week afterwards. So there's so many challenges and barriers that I face. That's just to name a few. I must admit, I was very lucky to have the Haitian community here in London. They were immediately my first point of contact when I decided that this is what I was doing. And here in the community, we have a Haitian restaurant, which is the Tiki Bar and Grill, which pretty much is like our community hub. And for me, my first point of contact was them, but particularly one of the elders in the community named Mario, who provided me with what I didn't know then, but I definitely use now, as I continue to navigate on this journey, was the tool to start the conversation. And that was the word of cha-cha. So, me going and saying maracas and then showing the image, and he was like, this is cha-cha. And so after I had the Creole word for the instrument, that's truly when my search began. And that was also my starting point for when I visit other countries, immediately finding out what is that word in their language. And so that was one way of navigating. Another way was people. People were amazing and using themselves and their knowledge and their skills of another language to translate or interpret text or conversations for me. So that was extremely important. Also, family, my family was equally supportive and, trying to find connections in Haiti, or, equally translating some or interpreting things when we went to Haiti, trying to locate farmers, or even, inviting me to come on this trip with them. So, those are all things of, help me navigate that. And again, back to the word. And, as I spoke of the instrument in these different places, particularly in Senegal, it's called Kassing there. As I was speaking of it, you could see that there was this connection, and you could tell that you could really begin to get the essence of the lineage of this instrument from Africa to Haiti, and you could see the thread starting to pull together and come through people and their experience. So, people were very instrumental in navigating those issues, those challenges and barriers of language, and where to start with the different elements, or just, accepting what they were offering, and realizing this is just getting bigger, but it was more than where I started. I'm kind of on two journeys. Like, it's the journey of the instrument, and it's the journey of myself. But in many ways, there's like this physical journey. I've visited these, at least Senegal, trying to make arrangements to visit Congo, and I've also visited Haiti. I was, again, blessed to return with family. I hadn't been there since I was basically a toddler, and so, so that connection has been a part of the journey that it has led me on, and that connection of reconnecting with my family in Haiti and having other family to help support those conversations, and then discovering that something that I had read about whilst researching cha-cha uh, whilst I was back in Haiti, turned out, and when I read about it, it was about, this particular person, same surname. And I was like, I wonder if they could be a relative. And then I get there and I learn more about our family history. And I learned that this is my relative. And I think, wow, just the fact that that even came to light, and would I have ever known if I hadn't have traveled back to Haiti and had those conversations with family about what research I'm doing, and there's, them sharing the stories of that. So that was a beautiful surprise. It was something that you could only imagine. And then the next thing you know, it's the reality. And now you actually know that this isn't just an imagination. There's also this internal journey, this journey of growth. I started off by thinking that this project was, about this one object. And, I would learn a bit more about the culture and about museums and, how community, works and engage, or the absence of engagement in museums. But, as time went on, it began to morph into something else. And then, what story am I telling? Then it becomes a story not only about the cha-cha, but also about myself. And, it started off with, focusing on this, understanding this instrument's history of origins, which pretty much linked to agriculture and craftsmanship, but it evolved into this transatlantic angle, as well as this political view and the spiritual view and this entertainment view and just people's lived memories. So now I'm down this, oral history view. And so it's so much that the journey has led me on. And like I said, I've now have made contact with different museums and people and, countries as well to continue this piece of work. So I'm really just excited to see where this river continues to flow. There's so many options. I've frequently been pondering that. And I still don't know. There's so many options. So there's, maybe I'm aware that I've obtained so much information right now, and I haven't had a lot of outputs being able to share that back. And what is the best medium or platform to do that? Is it short stories? Is it podcasts? Is it zines? Is it, maybe a children's book, or, trying to have an exhibition or to host talks? I mean, the list is endless, and they are all amazing options. So those are just a few that's been floating around. But I also think part of what's next is more research. Like I said, finding more funding. I need to go back to all of those countries. And since relationships have been built, and, people are in Senegal, like, I can't wait to share my story. So, getting back to that, having funding, not only for the travel, but for the equipment that's equally needed, for translation, like that's people's time, and energy. And, how do I respect that as well? Creating a website or some type of space or place digitally for people to be able to connect with it, and being able to support the artisans who are, talking me through their craftsmanship that's been passed down from generation to generation. And I think also what's next that I feel that I could benefit from, and which was, a perfect foundation of being a community action researcher, is having more mentorship in curation and in storytelling, and this form of research that I've started. I think that there's so much that can come from that, but I also am very aware, like, this isn't necessarily the world that I would normally navigate in. I'm a social worker and I work in wellness. So I've entered into a new realm over here. And so those are the things that are next. And I've found a few people that I'm going to contact for mentorship and storytelling, because that's I feel like I need to somehow create something and share in a journey that I've been on so far, and doing that in a way that also is respectful and also inclusive of those people who have been so generous in sharing their experience, their memories, and their time. So something collaborative with them and seeing where it goes. But watch this space. Lots of ideas, but I think it will boil down to funding and opportunities, that doors that open.